Stay informed with Pacific Mornings.
Ta'alofa lava, welcome back to Pacific Mornings. I'm your guest host, Khalia Strong. Now, Dr. Karamia Müller is a Pacific academic and co-director of Māpihi, the Māori and Pacific Housing Research Centre. She says homelessness is rising in Aotearoa, but key data is missing or being overlooked by the government. Her research focuses on values-based, community-led solutions to housing that reflect Pacific and Māori worldviews. She joins us now. Morena.
Morena.
Thank you for joining us. Now, Karamia, you've expressed concern on the lack of data on homelessness. What are the consequences of this gap, especially for our Māori and Pacific communities?
Well, the lack of data means, I guess, in simple terms, we can't really see the problem. And if we can't see the full scale of the problem, we can't measure it.
Yeah.
And if we can't measure it, we can't expect to create meaningful support.
It's a tricky one, hey? Do we know exactly how many of our Pacific people are homeless?
I beg your pardon?
Do we know exactly how many of our Pacific people are homeless?
No, we don't. We can't really get a good picture on that without Pacific-led research into it. One of the amazing things about Pacific people is they have support systems, and often those support systems can be the wraparound for people experiencing severe housing deprivation. That does mean that what looks like resilience is actually masking rather severe housing deprivation. So you might find people experiencing chronic homelessness, but they're experiencing it with a roof over their head.
Okay, can you
and that
expand
tends
on
to
that?
fall outside of the categories that exist within census data collection, as well as other approaches to homelessness data collection.
Okay, interesting. So you say sometimes people might be suffering homelessness but still have a roof over their head. Can you give some examples of how that might look?
Well, I think I'd just like to make the differentiation that often we live together because it's a source of intergenerational resilience. But sometimes when we have people living together, that pushes the household into pressures on the makeup of the family, that can actually create other issues down the track. So, for example, we think about air quality, lack of enough heating. So that's one example. I think we all know of instances where a family member may be experiencing is unable to access housing, and so they're moving between families until something arises. So you can experience that sort of chronic, severe housing deprivation while still having a roof over your head. We also know that often that we Pacific communities have utilized garages, and
The
there
infamous
is
extra
short-term
bedroom.
stays in garages, and garages that are beautifully fit out and very safe to be used as a short-term dwelling. But using a garage long-term, particularly when it starts to get cold, and particularly when we think about families that might have little ones, who are forced to use garages so they have a roof over their head. That's also in one way that you might be seeing this masked effect around housing, or homelessness rather.
Yes. Now, you said that homelessness is complex, but that government decisions around housing access have a huge impact. What immediate changes would make the biggest difference?
Immediate changes would probably be continued investment in emergency housing. We've, of course, just seen a report from the government 12 hours ago or so that there won't be a further investment in emergency housing. I think in this instance, investing in community providers who are not already stretched and have the room to grow capacity in that area, enabling them to innovate around housing, particularly around winter, I think would be an immediate step. Mobilizing Māori and Pacific housing research in the area. That would also be an area, that would be a move in the right direction. We saw some of the same sort of, let's say, urgent moves during COVID. There was a investment in looking at COVID research. That sort of mobilizing around this, around the crisis of homelessness would also, I think, see immediate better data for better decision making. And then I also think enabling more upstream housing delivery.
What does
So
that
ensuring
mean?
that there's policy work that helps with rentals, policy work that enables a less constrained rental market that would bring rentals down. Not the whole rental market, but at least a good section of the rental market to enable people to transition out of emergency housing and unlock that emergency housing for those who are experiencing homelessness at present.
How might that actually work though? Because I'm thinking there's already the accommodation supplement that kind of works against people by keeping market rents high. What might that rent assistance look like?
I think it would require a sort of regional approach because each region is very particular. But in Tamaki, there's definitely work that can be done around, at the very least, attenuating the accommodation supplement to actually sit alongside the rental market, which I think the accommodation supplement goes some way, but in no way matches some of the rise, the rise we've seen in rents. So these sorts of injections around immediate injections rather, to alleviate people or to at least transition people into rental in the short term, especially while the temperatures are low, and having potentially a way for them to target moving into culturally appropriate solutions as well for housing.
Interesting. Now, your current research looks at values based, community led housing. What does that look like in practice?
I think that's a really good question. And values-based research into housing is, I guess, one way to explain it is a Pacific researcher is more invested in upholding the mana of the people that they're researching with. Often, this is not the case for all researchers who are not Pacific, but I think Pacific people have had the experience, and certainly I've had the experience of being researched on rather than researched with. So I think it's actually just a different sort of integrity that enters the relationship between the researcher and the communities they're researching with.
Okay, no, I really like that. How do Pacific concepts like intergenerational care or collective well-being shape better housing design or policy? You mentioned that this is a family choice that we see in many Pacific communities of having multi-generational homes. So what might that look like in practice?
I mean, it's a really good question. I think when people think about multi-generational homes or intergenerational homes, they think 6 bedrooms and up. So they're just thinking about large houses. But having housing that is appropriate to intergenerational living for Pacific people might might be something like sleeping arrangements for elderly members of the family on the ground floor, as well as bathroom access, fluid study spaces and rooms for young people. They may also look like, to address the affordability issue, they may also look like they're tighter in terms of footprint. So they may have more stories, but they may also have multiple bathrooms and also more than one kitchen.
Okay.
We don't really see those sorts of housing designs because they're costly. But what underscores that is we haven't actually also had much research into alleviating the costs around consenting for multiple kitchens. Some of the work my colleagues are doing right now around ensuring that you can have multiple kitchens safely in one dwelling. So it's definitely there's smaller, I guess, like less visible design interventions that would enable more affordable, culturally appropriate intergenerational housing.
It sounds great in practice. What if you could shift one thing about the way Aotearoa we design or deliver housing? What would it be?
I would think higher density and culturally appropriate. So I would sort of caution against more greenfield developing. That's developing at the outskirts of the city where there is no developing and there is no current infrastructure, and shifting into higher but culturally appropriate housing within the city limits and investing in infrastructure.
Very interesting. And any final thoughts that you have across either the homelessness issue or our housing issues?
Um, I'd just like to say that I think the Ministry of Social Development and Ministry of Housing and Urban Development are improving how they capture data around people or individuals and families that are exiting emergency housing, as well as across the housing sector. So I did want to note that those ministries are working hard at some of the data capture. And I did want to also note that there are moves for Māori housing that's for Māori by Māori. That they're one of the levers that the government is currently turning, if you will. But I would love to see more for Pacific by Pacific housing initiatives coming out of central government.
Love that. Is that something that you're working on as well? It's with your, your doctorate in architecture.
Oh, yes, currently my housing, I have a research program that's looking at best case policy.
Can't wait to see it. Hey, thanks so much for joining us. That is Dr. Karamia Müller, from the co-director of the Māpihi Māori and Pacific Housing Research Centre. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Take
Thank you for
care.
having me.
You're welcome. Now, if you missed